what sparks the move from that kind of czarist style economy where, yes, it's authoritarian, but it seems a little bit more localized and certainly a lot less command and control by the sounds of it, to this more Soviet style economy? Is it the effects of World War One? Is it some other macroeconomic factors?
Well, it's the communist ideology that said, and you had a bunch of true believers, Lenin and his entire group. Uh, you had weak guidance in the critique of the Gotha program by Marx and Engels, very weak guidance, but it sort of painted a future of what an industrial economy should look like, as opposed to what the European democratic socialists were proposing in the Gotha program. Uh, and they faced the exigencies of civil war. Their immediate problem was to survive. You know, a small band who had locked up the czar and in short order will assassinate him. They had dismissed the Constituent Assembly, which was a constitutional congress that had been called to create a new Russian uh, government. They proceeded to arrest the majority party, the Social Revolutionaries, who were agricultural based, which is why they were a majority. Mass of the population supported them, and tried to impose their will by force. That meant, and they were based in the big cities. The big cities were the place that had industry, particular industries that were good for military purposes. So they mobilized that. They did it by command and control. They didn't even bother to plan. So one of the reasons directed central planning arose was because of the chaos of unplanned command that unplanned command caused. Uh, so they mobilized resources, they confiscated, they had revolutionary justice. You said no to anything, you were shot on the spot, and proceeded to win the Civil War from the very disorganized uh, and not with their hearts as fully in it whites who were on all the sides. They were sort of fighting for an old order, and the peasantry was not on their side, so they didn't get an uprising for massive support. Peasantry wasn't on the Bolshevik side either, but their attitude was the first thing the Bolsheviks did, 1918, issued a land decree. All land is to be put into the hands for use of the peasants who occupy it. Now, that wasn't legal ownership because all land belonged to the state legally, but the peasants had total use and control over it. That
Hmm.
immediately made them more enthusiastic for Bolsheviks than any alternative. Now,
Yeah, I'm
come
sure.
1921, March, the Bolsheviks had managed to execute opposition and suppress, and the economy had collapsed totally. You had industrial production down to something on the order of 20% of what it was before the Civil War started. Agricultural production was less than half. There was a danger of mass starvation in the cities. Uh, and sort of you go through every sector, uh, the economy had essentially ceased to function. The Kronstadt sailors, so called reddest of the red, the vanguard of the Bolshevik armed forces, rebelled against the command economy. Uh, they were sailors, but they had families out in the provinces from which they had been conscripted. Lenin backed down, declared the new economic policy, introduction of a little bit of markets. Uh, and after they surrendered, thinking that they were going to be given amnesty, had them all executed, which was consistent with the Bolshevik approach. But he did institute the new economic policy, which allowed small scale private entrepreneurship. It kept all the big factories in the control of the state. In fact, it kept everything that they considered important, the so called commanding heights of the economy. So that's all transportation, all trade, uh, and uh, any kind of serious manufacturing. But it liberalized the agricultural sphere. One of the consequences was a bunch of entrepreneurs appeared in the urban areas, basically involved in retail trading, making sure that what was produced got the people who are willing to pay for it, the so-called NEP men, because NEP is the new economic policy acronym. And out in the villages, you had the more entrepreneurial, uh, who tended to be from families that were somewhat better off and had more land that they had occupied before the war, uh, who proceeded to do very, very well, get very, very rich, provide demand for the kind of goods the Soviet state couldn't uh, provide. And so they stopped producing so much when they couldn't get things that they wanted with their sort of newly created wealth from massive agricultural production. Uh, that created two classes of proto bourgeois capitalists, the agricultural kulaks, as they were called, the tight fists, and the NEP men. And Stalin's great socialist offensive was in part aimed at eliminating both of those class enemies, along with Trotskyites and anybody else who opposed his absolute power. Uh, and that's the on the political, social side, and on the economic side, uh, crushed peasant resistance and unwillingness to produce as much as he thought they should, and just confiscated. And the confiscation went to the point where you had tens of millions who starved to death because he was taking everything that was growing and shipping it into the cities where it fed refugees from the countryside who were now hired as unskilled labor to build industry. Good bit of it under direction of U.S. engineers who had lost their jobs in the Great Depression and had been offered positions in Russia. They moved with their families, and uh, the families learned to regret it. Eventually, a lot of them ended up being executed in the various purges later. And even in the 1970s, the second time I visited the Soviet Union was on a USIA exhibit. And so we were 21 young Americans on stands displaying American consumer goods, the sort of which Soviets had never seen. And they people would come through and want to talk to us. And sort of as we get off our stands at the end of our shift, I had a couple of young women come up from families that claimed they were Americans. Their gra- either grandparents or parents had brought them in the 1930s to build socialism, and things had just gone from bad to worse. Please tell Nixon that we need to get out to do something to save us,
Oh,
as if 21-year-olds on an exhibit had any say in anything like that.
yeah, right. Sounds kind of scary.